It happened on a quiet Tuesday night, the most unusual and surprising night of my life. After a long day at work, fatigue came over me, and darkness enveloped me like a soft, comforting blanket. For 8 years now, since my ex-husband and I had separated, I had been a single parent to Tom, fulfilling both roles and finding both challenges and benefits along the way. It was often difficult, but watching Tom's development gave me all the strength I needed. There were days when I felt overwhelmed, when the load of responsibilities seemed too heavy, but every time I looked at Tom, I realized it was all worth it. His laughter, his accomplishments, and even his small acts of kindness reminded me why I kept moving forward. He was my reason for everything. That evening, the house was silent as I changed into my pajamas and climbed into bed. Tom had gone to bed early after a full day of studying and video games, leaving me in the silence I cherished so much. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, surrendering to the warmth and softness of my bed. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows on the walls, and I welcomed the tranquility after such a tiring year. The silence of the house, the soft hum of the refrigerator downstairs, and the rustling of the trees outside the window all contributed to the serenity I craved. It seemed that for a moment the world paused to let me rest. Tom and I had been through a lot together since his father left. It had always been just the two of us, trying to figure life out, and even though Tom was in his early 20s, our bond remained as strong as ever. He had a good heart, he was always caring, and sometimes I worried that he had too much responsibility for his age. I remembered him helping me around the house without me asking, making a cup of tea when I looked particularly exhausted, or just sitting silently by my side when he knew I needed it. I smiled softly at the thought of him, but fatigue came over me, and I began to drift into a much-needed sleep. A light knock on the door brought me back from the threshold of sleep. I blinked, trying to focus. Mom. Tom's voice was barely audible, but it was enough to wake me up. I squinted and looked at the door, where I could see his silhouette in the dim light of the hallway. I pulled myself up slightly, leaning on my elbows. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked. Tom hesitated before he took a step inside, and the door clicked softly behind him. He looked tired, and I could feel the heaviness he was carrying, something that had haunted him since the divorce. There were nights when I could hear him pacing the room, restless, unable to find peace. I knew he was struggling, but he rarely talked about it. I patted the bed beside me, smiling comfortingly. "Come here, there's plenty of room if you need to stay for a while." He hesitated for only a moment before coming over and settling down next to me. His tired eyes met mine, and I saw vulnerability in them, something he rarely allowed himself to show. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked quietly. Quietly, I asked. He shook his head, his hair falling over his forehead. "No," he whispered. I just want to be near you." I reached out, brushing his hair gently. "It's okay, sweetie. You can stay as long as you need to." He smiled at me gratefully, though I could tell he was still thinking about something. I decided not to insist, letting the silence of the room envelope us. We'd done this before, sharing moments of silence when words weren't enough, when just being there for each other was what mattered. I knew he found comfort in my presence, and I was more than happy to give it to him. We lay covered in the same blanket, and I listened as his breathing gradually slowed, becoming even and calm. Just when I thought he was dozing off, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mommy, do you ever think about Daddy?" The question caught me off guard. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice soft. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but you know how things were between us." Tom nodded, his gaze still fixed on me. "Do you ever think things could have been different?" A weight came over me as I pondered his question. "I think we did the best we could," I said softly. "Sometimes things don't work out the way we hope." I paused and looked at Tom, trying to gauge his reaction. His eyes were thoughtful, searching, like he was trying to figure out something deep inside. None of us had it easy, I continued, but we made the choice that seemed best for us at the time, and that choice led us here to where we are now. Tom lowered his gaze, his fingers absent-mindedly skimming the edge of the blanket. I just wonder if I could have done something to make it better, he murmured. My heart clenched at his words. I pulled myself up slightly and nuzzled against his cheek. Oh, Tom, please don't ever think it's your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Your father's choices were his own, and you had no control over them. You were, and still are, the best son anyone could ever dream of. He nodded, but I could see his emotions lingered. We stayed like this for a long time, and the silence between us was filled with unspoken understanding. I could feel the pain he carried inside him, the questions that haunted him, and I wanted to take it all in. Eventually his eyes closed and he drifted into sleep. His face finally relaxed, the tension gone. I watched him for a while, my heart heavy but full of love. I knew it was a process, that healing takes time, and I was ready to be there for him every step of the way. The next morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, and I awoke to find Tom still sleeping next to me, his facial features peaceful. I watched him for a moment, and my heart burst with love and fierce protection. Carefully slipping out of bed, I headed downstairs to make breakfast. The house was quiet, and I took my time, savoring the silence. I knew that mornings like this were fleeting, that one day Tom would be gone, starting his own life, and these moments would be unforgettable to me. As I made pancakes, my thoughts never left our conversation. I wished I had noticed sooner how much guilt Tom felt that he should never have felt. I thought about the times he hid his emotions, the times he made a brave face for me. It pained me to realize that he carried this burden alone. But now I knew, and I was determined to help him get rid of that burden, to remind him that we were always together. No matter what happened, I would always be there for him. When Tom finally came downstairs, he looked like himself, hair disheveled, a sleepy smile on his face. I set a plate of pancakes in front of him, and he smiled warmly and gratefully at me. He sat down, and for a moment there was a comfortable silence between us, the kind of silence that only comes after years of understanding and love. "Thanks for last night, Mom," he said quietly, meeting my eyes. "You don't need to thank me, sweetheart," I replied, my voice soft. "I'll always be there for you, no matter what happens." I reached out and placed my hand on his palm and squeezed it gently. "You're my son, and I love you more than anything in the world." He smiled, this time genuinely, and we ate our breakfast in the soft warmth of the morning light, the silence between us filled with love and understanding. There was a sense of renewal, a feeling that perhaps we had turned a corner. Sunlight streamed through the windows, filling the kitchen with warmth, and I couldn't help but feel hopeful. We had faced so many challenges, and yet we were stronger. After breakfast, Tom helped me wash the dishes, and we talked about all sorts of little things, his classes, his weekend plans, and a movie he wanted us to watch together. It felt good, natural, like a return to simpler times. I realized that it's moments like these, the everyday, the seemingly insignificant, that make life beautiful. It wasn't about the big events or milestones, but the love we shared in the small, quiet moments. Later that day, as Tom was getting ready to meet some friends, he stopped at the door. "I love you, Mom," he said, his voice sincere and his eyes met mine. "I love you too, Tom," I replied, and my heart raced with excitement. "Always." He smiled and then walked away, the door closing quietly behind him. I stood still for a moment. The house was quiet again, and I felt peaceful. I knew we had a long road ahead of us, that there would be more conversations, more nights filled with questions and doubts. But I also knew that we would face it all together, just as we always had, and that, more than anything else, gave me hope.